Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, good to be here. Thank you for the introduction. Nice to see some customers, some old friends, and let's have fun together. Thank you.
Okay. And then also joining us today is Christian Hattung. He's the MD for AW Power. Christian, you just want to introduce yourself and say hello?
Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks for joining. Good to see some familiar faces here and also some new ones. Looking forward to having this webinar with you. Thanks, Jeff.
Yeah. And we're quite blessed to have such a famous celebrity like Christian. He's just fresh from his ETV promotion on the other night. So I don't know if you guys caught that on the ETV news. And then our final person that's joined us is Winston Jordan. Very, very grateful for him to join us from here. Winston, why don't you just tell us a bit about yourself and where you fit into the EV market?
Sure. Thank you so much. It's really great to be presenting, and talking around some of the technologies around electric vehicles. So really, I'm the managing director of GridCars, and we specialize in doing electric vehicle charging stations, and that varies from customer charging stations, so at homes, right up to public charging stations out on the highways, to make it accessible for people to drive from Johannesburg all the way down to Cape Town and across all the major highways.
Okay, great. And why did you get into this, Winston?
Well, I think there was a big need. We were looking as a company where the new niches are coming from in terms of where the technology will move and how things like electric vehicles are going to disrupt the market. And so that became quite important and strategic for us to realize that there was going to be a big need for proper management systems behind it, for billing and control systems, so that you can manage the charging infrastructure. And as we started getting into that, we realized also that the need for actually putting hardware on the ground, because there were a lot of people discussing this at the time, and they would say things like, oh, it's a chicken and egg, do we bring cars first and then the infrastructure, do we infrastructure and the egg and the cars? And we just felt as GridCars, the only thing we could do, because we didn't bring cars, was really to put down that infrastructure and to remove that debate that it's chicken and egg. There is no chicken and egg. The infrastructure is there. Now the cars must come.
Yeah, and I think you've done well, because I think the demand is starting to become there. And I think, maybe let's talk to some of those numbers in terms of EV. I mean, Henry's been driving this from AW Power on the group side of things. I'm quite looking forward to. I've never been. I'm one of those people, the 87% at the bottom, that's never been in EV, and I'll soon be driving one when I get down to Cape Town as part of the pool vehicle that we've got. But tell us what you've seen the growth over the last few years.
Yeah, so I mean, certainly you can read what is displayed on the screen, but I mean, the highlights are really that they're going to be at least 8, potentially as many as 12 new vehicles, or body types, as we like to call it, in South Africa over the next 6 months, or first 6 months of next year, of 2022. And that's quite a few new manufacturers joining into the space. And new categories of cars. So we're starting to see vehicles moving down the value chain in terms of pricing, as well as up. So much higher performance vehicles. And it's going to be a very, very interesting time. I think next year is the year that the general public will start to realize that EVs are coming, and there's not much we can do to stop it. There's a belief that that EVs will account for 70% of global passenger vehicles by 2040. Now, what's quite important about that is that most likely it'll still be 100% of new vehicles by 2030, or maybe 2032. So 2040 is maybe 10 years later, where we'll see 75% of overall fleet penetration, because more and more people will want to get rid of ICE engines because they simply will not be efficient. The electric vehicles will just totally outperform all of that.
Sure, that's staggering numbers. And I think one of the things that's not there, but maybe you can talk to it as well. Look, the initial sort of branch out into the EV vehicle, they were quite costly, let's be honest. I mean, it wasn't cheap to buy an EV vehicle. But how are you seeing the sort of the price points changing for the mass production?
So definitely worldwide mass production is kicking in. We are expecting price parity by 2023. That's sort of the general feeling in the industry, is that like for like, you'll find vehicles on that level. Certainly the upper end of vehicles was the easier place to launch, because people are less sensitive to price increases or to increased pricing. So whereas we are now starting to see it moving down that value chain, with companies like VW entering the market, and vehicles like the ID3s, we're going to certainly see more accessible vehicles for the general public at that level.
Okay. Well, let's find out where our audience is sitting at the moment. I'm going to quickly launch a poll for everyone. If you in the audience can just tell us whether or not you drive an EV currently, because I know I don't, and I'm quite looking forward to it, but it'd be really interesting to see where everyone else is. Okay, so far 30-70, no, not so many people. Yeah, it looks like most people don't have an EV, so there's an interest level. Let's give a few more responses in. Okay, interesting. And yeah, it's moving up a little bit. Seems like those EV drivers are a bit slow and they put their foot to the pedal, but they're putting their details down. I don't know, been swayed by Henry. Did you click 3 times for your cars?
Just once.
All right. Okay, so yeah, look, it's actually 40-60 spent by the end there. So it looks like there's quite a few EV drivers. So it'd be interesting now to both help them in terms of understanding where the charging and benefits on charging, and for those who haven't driven an EV like me, to ask the silly questions, or I'll ask them for you. Let's put it that way, because I've never been prone to be not be silly. So, okay, all right. Well, let's bring Henry in here. Henry, why did you buy 3 pool vehicles?
Yes, thanks, Jeff. I think the first thing is reduced carbon emissions. I think it's on my conscience also, and the sound, noise levels, carbon emissions, very important to me. The reduced running costs, I think very important. I realized that with an EV, it sounds like it may be cheaper. We were also into the solar field, and I thought maybe if we generate electricity, it could be even more cheaper. So that was the thought initially. And then the massive cost reduction when charged for solar, of course, was primary in our thoughts. And then, of course, there's also tax incentives for businesses. So with a well-planned and installed rooftop EV system, you can reduce your cost of electricity as well as enjoy energy security, plus avoid paying vehicle fuel costs. So it's a total solution. I think it's part of your life. Like we also have water. I think in Cape Town, we need to have our own water storage, electricity as well, and now you can do your vehicle as well. So it's a massive reduction in cost. And it's soundless. We started with our EVs last year, just before COVID. We bought our first BMW i3. It was the first generation with a small battery. The battery was about 20 kilowatt hours. A few tips, you couldn't even reach Paul, or you could just reach Paul with that vehicle. So we sold that within 2 months, and we bought the one up with a bigger battery. And I think that opened up avenues for us. And our first trip to Nigel was done in this red BMW, which is the battery capacity is about 33 kilowatt hours. And we did that, and it was, wow, I didn't think it was possible. And that's why I also met Winston. That's on the way, we found these charge stations. They were very conveniently placed. And that opened up my mind to think, but this car, you can use this car to travel on the highway as well. And that just was a total revelation to us.
Yeah, and I think we're going to talk through that trip to Neisner that you kind of studied recently as well. And I was amazed by the cost reduction. I think, more than anything, the amount of petrol I put in my car and the price point that you're paying at the moment, it's actually a factor in your holidays, where what you were showing me, especially if you can get the right areas or charge from solar PV, like you said, of your own home, the cost is absolutely negligible compared to the petrol cost. Funny story I saw the other day was something around the FBI, I think, in the States, and investing in electric vehicles so they can sneak up on the criminals.
So the lifestyle we develop in our own business and life is that I drive from home. I've got a solar PV system installed at home that I use over weekends. At the office, we've got a 20 kilowatt system at the office. So we drive daily about 25 kilometers on the M5 to the office, and we charge the car at the office normally, and there's an abundance of energy at the office if it's not raining. If it's raining, we sometimes still use the grid, but very small part of the grid. And the average consumption in kilowatt hours is about 12.5, driving from Simonstown to Kenilworth. So that's significant to note that And as you go up your speed, that 12.5 goes up to 18 on the open road up to 20. So the EV tends to consume a lot more energy because there's no gears, there's wind resistance, but driving in town. So our experiences for the past year, we spent almost nothing on electricity, or the direct cost is really zero. So going back to sources of charging your EV, how can we charge it? So you can charge it from home or office charging, like in our case, we've got our EV installation. The grid, you can charge from the grid, home or office. You plug it into a normal 15 amp plug, and you can charge it from your office or from your home. Secondly, of course,
I think that's an important point here. Is that, we've got three sources from the grid there, and me not knowing much about EVs, one of my questions was, I'm driving around and suddenly I run out of petrol, which was obviously charged. Like, how easy is it just to plug in? That's kind of what a lot of people are going to ask, because obviously petrol stations are ubiquitous, but what do you do when you run out of charge?
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, so it's important never to run this car totally empty. There's abundance of warnings in most of these electric cars that will warn you. You can even go to the navigation. It will tell you where is the next station or a charge station. If that's nothing like that, you must just be careful. You can stop at a house. As long as you're at a house, there's normally there's a mobile charger which you can plug into a normal plug, and the draw is about 1.2 kilowatt. So if you're in harder, you can stop at a house or a home or a garage and say, I need to charge. And you can plug it in there, but you have to wait at that 1.2 level of charge. It can take quite some time, but it's a backup. So whenever you are, like for example, the GridCars, look at the network, there's some towns where they are far between. What you can do is planning a trip, driving in the country, you say, okay, let me plan an overnight at one of these areas where there isn't many charge stations. Stay overnight at the guest house, plug it in, and overnight you will fill up your tank.
Okay, so and I think the proof is always in the pudding. And so I mean, it's one thing to say, you talk about town, besides load shedding, there's generally electricity available somewhere. So you can actually, even with load shedding, someone will have a generator and you can probably charge up. But like you said, better management, much like your phone. And I think that's the equivalent that we've got to think about is, when your phone starts looking down, what's the first thing you do? You go and find somewhere to charge it. So what made you think about this Cape to Knysna jersey? Because that, for me, would seem like there's nowhere to charge on some of those roads. It's just petrol stations. So tell us about that journey.
Yeah, before I get to that planning, I think what happened with the cars also is in the BMW range, for example, it's got three generations now. The first generation had about 20 kilowatt hours of battery life. The second generation has about 33. And then the current generation, the latest, is about 44 kilowatt hours. And 44 is substantial, you can travel now. So with that, our second trip to Knysna was with this white BMW, which has got 44 kilowatt hours. And we planned this trip, and knowing that there's this, we also have a card, prepaid cards from GridCars. We recharge the card from their website, and we take on the journey. So if you look at the next slide, I think the next slide.
I'll the numbers now, Henry. Just the other thing I think you mentioned to me beforehand, and this is because I'm new to this world, is there's also sort of a petrol can basically there for an emergency backup as well, from what I understand.
Yeah, this is an option on the BMW. Not many cars has got that, but on the i3, it's called the Rex. It's got a 640 motorbike, BMW motorbike engine in the back of the car, which is a generator. It doesn't drive the wheels. It's not a hybrid. It's just a backup, and it will charge the batteries. You can invoke this if you're 70% rate of the depletion. You can press the button. It will then charge the batteries, and it's got a 10 liters capacity. So that 10 liters give you about 130 kilometers. So in real life, if you haven't got a charge station with electricity, you can fill the car with fuel, with petrol, 130, and go right to the next town. As long as there's distance about 130 or less, you can drive with petrol forever. So there's nothing stopping you, and you can go anywhere with that.
Well, that extends the range quite a lot then, Henry. If you're talking, most EVs now are doing sort of 200 Ks on a fully charged. plus 130 on the petrol. Are you saying we're looking at about 300k range?
Yeah, in fact, 400. If you're in town, you get about 300 kilometers on this BMW with a 44 kilowatt hour battery gives you about 300 kilometers in town. In the open road, about 200. And the petrol gives you another 100 to 150. But what happens with the cars is that this wrecks the mix of petrol and also electricity. BMW stopped producing that, and all the other manufacturers also, they don't do it. They don't see it as a pure solution. So what happens is with the newer cars is they've got much bigger batteries. For example, the iX3, I think, coming out next year has got, I think, a 60 kilowatt hour or 90 kilowatt hour. The Porsche's got 90 kilowatt hour. So the batteries just get bigger, and as the battery technology develops, they get smaller, lighter, and bigger. So I think having a fuel engine as a backup is something of the past. This is last what we've seen from that. But for us ourselves in our company, all three of our cars has got the fuel backup, the petrol backup, because it's just, this is where we live, you know. And so we buy these cars are used. They not inexpensive, but they less than the new cars, and it's worth to add the petrol motor option for us.
So let's go through that cost of your trip. Because I think that's what people are interested in. What is this going to cost if you actually want to run one of these?
Yeah, thank you, Jed. This was our second trip to the one we did last year was September. We did again September this year. So we fill up the car in Cape Town and we drive. We go past the first stop from GridCars would be at Somerset West. We passed that because we've got adequate range in this BMW. The next stop we stopped at was at Caledon, and that was 138 kilometers from Cape Town. And the battery, the state of charge at that stage stopping was 39%. So we did a full adequate reserve, and it took us 1 hour and 7 minutes to fill the car to almost 100%. And we charged 25.9 kilowatt hours. The cost was 152 Rand for that charge.
So let me just stop here. Your first trip on a trip after 130 kilometers cost you $152 plus the coffee, let's say cappuccino each. So let's say $200. I don't know what it would cost me to do 138 kilometers in a fuel. I'm sure you'll get to that, but it's definitely a lot more than that. Maybe
a lot more than that, yes. The consumption at that stage was, so the cost was of kilowatt hours was 588 at that sort of charge station. And our average our consumption was 18.8. And the running cost was 110 cents per kilometer. That was our first stop. So we filled the car to about 100%, which I will later on explain. It's not necessary. It's better not to fill, but we did this initially, and we learned from our mistakes. The second stop was, the second fuel station, charge station was Swellendam at Buffelsjag River. Is a good station there as well. We also skip that as well. I may also just say that these charge stations, it's high power, it's DC. So there's a big difference. If you charge DC, it's much faster, high power versus AC charging. AC goes to, I think, about 22 and so on, where the DC charge stations that Winston has got GridCars. The stop at Caledon is a 30 kilowatt hour DC. The next one, Riversdale, where we stop, is a 60 kilowatt hours. So think about 60 kilowatt hours. If you have a tank of, if you need about 30 kilowatts that you need to fill up, using a 60 kilowatt charge station will take you half an hour to fill up that tank, to fill up that battery. So Riversdale was our next stop at 188. We came there when we were at about 8% state of charge. It took us 1 hour, 1 minute to fill up the car with 41 kilowatt hours. And the cost was 239 and 584 for the fuel, for the electricity. And our average consumption was about 21. The running cost at that stage was $127 per kilometer.
Okay.
So that was
And I think you know, besides the cost that you obviously overall, if you do this cost on a petrol engine, the first leg of that trip didn't cost you anything because it was solar PV. So the cost of the electricity for you was solar PV that, you know, you already had the infrastructure, you know, so that's also, you know, I would have normally filled up my tank before I left. Besides the fill-ups on the route, I'd also have to have filled up my tank previously. And yes, I could probably do that on a full tank of petrol all in one go. But a full tank of petrol nowadays is, depending on your size of vehicle, I filled up the other day, I think it was $900 or something. So we're talking almost double the cost for the same trip. And so, yeah, that's a pretty much amazing cost saving, considering that this technology is new. And we haven't even got to the competition of the markets. And I know Winston won't want to hear this, but I'm sure there's other people who are going to compete and try and get lower rates for filling up as well.
But then you see, we also skipped George. Next was a stop, but we skipped that away. And Neisner, our last stop, was in that we reached Neisner at 196 kilometers. And the recharge there was, as you say, it was at the level, wasn't at nothing from solar. It was with that we charged from a home plug, 15 ampere, and the cost of electricity at the restaurant where we stayed was $2.50. In fact, it was about $2.40. We paid $2.50 for the convenience. So that $2.50 per kilowatt hour was a big reduction in what we paid at GridCars. But I must say, I don't mind paying that at GridCars because it's so convenient. You can drive anywhere on the main roads and it's there. So you really pay for the convenience. And you'll see some slides later on, if you compare that to fuel cost and diesel, it is still cheaper and it's convenient. So looking at this slide, this cost comparison, left-hand side, we also have a Pajero, a Mitsubishi Pajero in the family, a diesel 4x4. That only gives us about 11 liters per 100 kilometers. So the running cost on a vehicle like that, at current pricing of 17 Rand 12 cents per litre, it's running at about 101 Rand 88 cents per kilometre. If you go the next one down, if you have a typical SUV, a petrol SUV, and they go typically run at 7 litres per 100 kilometres. I know some of the modern bigger 4x4s can also go down to about 8-7, but that's a typical size. So with a 7 liters per 100 kilometer SUV, you can go down to 1 Rand 24 cents per liter. Just go back there again, check. Okay, the next one then on the highway, using a GridCar with a BMW, running at a consumption of about 20 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers, paying 588. The running cost is per kilometer is 1 Rand 18. So it's still less than an SUV, than a petrol SUV. Then if you go to the third graph on that slide, yes, that's if you would then charge your EV in town from GridCars and at a lower consumption of 14 kilowatt hours per kilometer. You would run at less than 1 Rand, you run at 82 cents per kilometer. Then going to the far right, if you charge your EV in town from your normal, from the grids at 250, or it could be less than 250, you're running at, say, 35 cents per kilometer. So you can see the huge difference between that 35 cents and the 1 Rand 88 driving a SUV or a 4x4 on the open road. It's a big difference. Now, what you don't see to the right there is if you charge from solar, your direct cost is really zero. So it's a massive difference. It's interesting to see these numbers. It really gives you an idea of why it pays to drive an EV and charge it from the system.
I think also, Henry, and we don't touch it on much, but I think it's just to make a note on it that, you know, besides the fact that there's a cost of actually filling up your car is much cheaper, you kind of alluded to the fact that running, because the maintenance on an EV car, the working parts, the non-combustion engine, etc., it's just a little bit better in terms of a better system, cleaner system that'll actually probably potentially last longer. I mean, you've bought 3 used cars. What maybe just touch on that as well, because the cost savings there are huge as well.
Yeah, there's a relatively high initial cost. They don't come cheap. You start looking at about 550,000 to 700,000 rand for these BMWs, but that's only cost because they come with a maintenance plan, but they only service once a year, and that's minor. The service is something like just checking and change the brake fluid. There's no other servicing components, and these cars are designed typically for 20 years. And if you look at the design of the cars, it's so simple. There are no gears. There's no gears in an electric car. It's just you go forward or you go backwards. And so there's no gears. There's maybe a few bearings in the wheels, but it's so simple in the design, which makes it, if you look at the simplicity of the design, it's smartly designed, but it's very simple. That's why it's cheap. So long term, it's a low cost car. I think there's no maintenance cost really for us. There's no.
So what you're saying is that the terror of the hill starts on your driver's test is no longer.
No longer. And you also have time to drive. I think the good thing is if you're driving on the car on open road, you get a call. The car's also got a SIM card. You get a call through this telephone system, hands-free. The reception is crystal clear. So it's so nice to drive in the car like this. You take a call, it's crystal clear. There's no noise. It's just a different world.
Okay. So I mean, look, I think what we've done here in this trip and the intention behind this, just for the audience, was really to just, a lot of people, myself included, were very scared, much like when your cell phone is running out of charge. How do you charge a car? I think the reality is, for people and like Winston have created this infrastructure, the fact that you have the mobile charger for other sources of energy, there's no need any longer within an EV to worry about the range on your trip. Obviously, we're not talking about rural game reserve type trips where there's no electricity. Obviously, you need to charge it somewhere. But from a general being in town or through highways, there's no sort of risk, which is fantastic to know. However, do you think South Africa is best placed for an EV revolution? Sorry, that's quite a tongue twister there in the morning. EV revolution. Are you guys, the audience? I mean, obviously there's a 60-40 split. How do you feel about where South Africa is right now, given the load shedding, given the infrastructure problems we have? Do you think there's enough of demand? Do you think there's enough people that will want to take advantage of this? Do you think there's enough Winstons building the infrastructure? Okay, so most people are saying yes. It's a couple of people saying no. Not many people on the fence. I like that about this audience, is either yes or no. I don't like people sitting on the fence. Okay. Yeah, so it looks like most people think they're ready. So I mean that's good to know. I mean, I think there's a positivity, and we do believe it. And I think that's why actually I engaged with Henry initially to get a job, because I wanted to be part of the AW Power journey. I think it's a really powerful one, both EVs and solar power. So let's bring in Winston now. So Winston's obviously put his life's work towards this. Winston, maybe you want to give us a little bit more background on GridCars and where the infrastructure is right now. Are we ready for the EV revolution?
Yeah, absolutely. I think to just answer the question, I know it was a poll and everybody just had the choice of yes or no, but I have a little bit more of a privilege to then really articulate that. And I think, we're well positioned as a country to be able to exploit renewable energies and things like that. So one of the advantages we talk about with electric cars is to say, you can charge at home, you can make your own fuel, you make your own electricity in theory. And based on that, having been in a country where we really can exploit that and we really can make electricity anywhere by using things like solar, I honestly think that we have a big future with electric vehicles. And you mentioned earlier about other people. Yeah, there are lots of other people starting to look at building infrastructure, and as GridCars, we absolutely welcome it. It's certainly not something we don't want to hear. I think we don't want to hear that nobody's is doing the development of the highways, because that puts all the pressure on us to try to be everything to everybody. And it's really amazing to be collaborating with some of these people, like companies like Breathe, and looking at how do we take this technology forward and how do we target particular parts of the market and have different business strategies. So each of the people looking at installing infrastructure has very, very different business strategies around how they're going to approach the market. So I think that's a very important part of where we're going with that. So I just want to get my screen share up for you that you can see. So is that visible to everybody? If I can just get a thumbs up and I'm good.
Yeah, all good.
Okay, great. Yeah, so let me tell you a little bit more about GridCars and just about, you know, where we see the industry going and how, what I think the important things are to know about the South African industry. So GridCars really functions or operates in three areas. Firstly, we're a charge point supplier. It was never our intent to be a charge point supplier as such. It's just that we're a relatively big buyer of charge points, and we tend to know which are the good systems. So based on that, we've sort of got one or two systems that are our preferred systems. We've got good relationships with manufacturers. We can really support that hardware. So it just makes sense for us to also then sell that hardware to other people, because then we've got the momentum in the market and we've got the numbers. So we're a charge point supplier. We supply people into the network. We're a charge point operator. We manage the charge point network on behalf of customers. So, for example, you can take an OEM. They might have 100 charging stations across their dealers and other public locations and their offices. And we would then manage that infrastructure on their behalf. We'd be monitoring the infrastructure. We'd be dealing with calls from the customer, trying to ensure that the experience is positive, that they're not having trouble. So, you know, if Henry arrived at a charging station and his card wasn't working, then he would call us and we would help him understand how to fix that and get him going again, that he can actually get charged. The next part is exactly that, is we work as an e-mobility provider. So we work with different charge point or charging, what we call EMPs, so charging cards. And those cards then allow the customer to load money or to have money available, or potentially as part of a fleet system. And those cards then allow you to just tap on the thing. So the process is really simple. Plug in your card, tap your card, off you go, and your charge should be working. And then finally, we use all of these things. So our knowledge about the hardware, our management skills around the networks and the customers that are looking for charging, and we put that into very strategic investments, look into where do we invest in infrastructure. And that started in South Africa with investing on the highways, and I'll tell you a bit more about that just now. Just to quickly, I like to believe I'm the optimist on where these things are going to go. So this is an optimistic view. I'm the first to admit it, but you know, I'm also the first one to tell you that, you know, whenever they projected timelines for changing from black and white to color TVs, they were nearly 10 times too long. So any timeline we project now is most likely too long. I was listening recently to one of the big OEMs that's going to be launching vehicles next year, and they said that their last new fuel model will be introduced in 2027. So that means after that, it's only electric vehicles being introduced into the market. Their expectation is that they'll only be selling EVs by 2030. Now, that very same OEM 2 or 3 years ago was saying 2035, 2040. So they've already pulled their timelines in as they started to realize where that market is going. So this view looks and says,
what that, Winston, is, I mean, you see a lot of the businesses outside of this industry saying they're going to be totally green by 2030. You know, and that's, you know, I think that supports this, you know, and you know, they actually bring in solar powered EV cars as part of that green solution as a added extra, but I think they're talking about the infrastructure in its entirety. So I do think the support is there.
Yeah, for sure. So this looks and says that really by 2030 we'll see the last fossil fuel cars being sold. It doesn't mean that you know, we'll probably find some fossil fuel vehicles being sold much further into the future, but it's going to be less than 3 or 4%. You know, it's going to be the absolute minority, just very specific vehicles that maybe collectors are looking for or something like that. So we'll see a very strong growth from 2025, 2026 onwards is where we'll see the real aggressive growth of EVs in the market. Not that it's not aggressive already, but it's going to put to shame what we're seeing today in terms of growth. So when we talk about charging, there's really two types of charging, and I think it's important that we just broadly cover that for you. The first thing is AC charging and then DC charging. So AC is where the charger itself is actually sitting inside of the vehicle. So you'll see on the picture that I'm showing there, the charger is physically in the vehicle, and the connection is really an intelligent switch that is switching the energy and monitoring the energy and doing the billing and managing those sides of it, but that is then pushing the energy into the vehicle that it can actually charge the car. When you move to DC charging in the bottom picture, you'll see the charger itself talks directly to the battery. So it charges directly onto the battery, and it then would also talk to a battery management system just to monitor the state of the batteries, etc. The biggest difference between the two is certainly your cheaper chargers, because they contain less electronics, are your AC chargers, but they're also the slower ones. So you're looking at anything from 3 to 12 hours, depending on which vehicle it is, the charge level that you have. Maybe you restrain your charging. We find a lot of customers restrain the charging speed just to match up with their solar so that they can charge only on solar. And then on the DC side, certainly the price ranges just go up in terms of costing, but so do the charging speeds. So we can see charging speeds right down to 20 minutes. And that is for big cars. If you've got a big charger and a big car, then you can charge it very quickly with a lot of power. We've seen power levels. Yeah.
Maybe just explain what you mean by the price range. What are you actually buying and purchasing there with that number?
It's the electronics. It's the piece of the piece of electronics standing on the side of the road. So the actual physical pillar and whatever technology sits inside of that pillar. So and that's really where those costs lie. And then of course the installation, the civil works, all of those sort of things. This is not the only costs in owning a charging station. These here are the capital costs. This is what it costs you to buy it and put it down. But once you actually do own a charging station, you've potentially got other costs, insurance, maintenance on those units, the possibility of even paying for the site where you're installing it. All of those sort of things start to play into that narrative. But really the big thing to remember is AC is the slower type of charging, DC the faster type of charging. But that said, we can have slow DC and we can have fast AC as well. But just depends on the technology that's installed in the vehicle, because the AC is dependent on that.
And then a question for you in terms of where the vehicle manufacturing is at the moment. Do most of them allow for both charging, or is it a little bit tending towards the DC charging?
No, they definitely all allow both. Both, but it's on a single plug. So if you look here at the bottom in the middle, you'll see the plug type is called a CCS plug. Okay, but have a look at the plug right next to it. You see it looks exactly the same. So actually what they do is they use this single format to do both AC and DC connections. So on a single physical plug. But yeah, but they do cater for both. The only vehicles that don't cater for both would be your hybrid vehicles. So the hybrid vehicles would normally only cater for AC charging. They don't always have DC, although that said, we have seen some new hybrid vehicles now coming out with DC charging capabilities. So they'd be able to then charge much faster on those vehicles.
Yeah. So from a recommendation then from a charging, because that's, obviously what you're doing there is if you were to be a partner in your network, and that's what your kind of cost outlay. But if I was a purchaser of a vehicle, and a lot of the people on the call are that, you would suggest a hybrid is not the option for them, because obviously one, the charging infrastructure is going towards non-hybrid, as kind of Henry talked to, and two, also the charging times are going to be much slower, so you're going to have a bit more frustration.
Yeah, look, I think I'm a non-supporter of hybrid vehicles. Just very simply, if you look in the rest of the world, hybrids have reached their peak, so they're now on the decline. We haven't quite reached the peak in South Africa. We might only reach that peak a year or two from now. But the point is, we now know that it is the writing is on the wall that hybrids are a short-term solution, which is always what it was believed, is that hybrids are just a stepping stone for a 4 or 5 year period. And I think we're getting to the end of that period. So it doesn't, for me, I'm not a fan of hybrid technology. I think we've got to commit to EVs and maybe at the best range extenders. So having the capability of extending range. So then just to go a little bit more into the charging side of it, once we move to home charging, you're now looking at systems somewhere between the 10 and 20,000 Rand mark to put a charger in at home. But not all chargers are equal. And I think this is something that's really, really important to know the difference. There's a lot of cheaper systems out there. And those cheaper systems will not have what we would call, let's just say, power control. So a level of managing the power, and that management, if you look at the graph to the left-hand side, so your charger is running it very close to your limit, the limit being the red line. So there's your charger on that green line. So we're running very, very close to the limit of your property at that point, because the charger is quite a powerful device. It's like 2 kettles on at the same time. And somebody then switches on a washing machine in the house. What will then happen is the actual power would exceed your capacity of the site, and you would trip. So you would see you would kick out your main breaker. With smart charging and smart charging systems, if you look at that red line, the full capacity is at the green line, the charger is on the dotted line. When they switch on something like a washing machine, you'll see the charger steps down to create the spare capacity so that we don't end up tripping the network. Now, this is critically important. So if you're going to be buying a charger, one of the important questions to ask the people you're buying it from is, does this do power management? Is it going to prevent tripping at my house? Or is it just going to add to the problem and become a bigger part of the problem? Especially if you're wanting to charge from solar, it becomes really important that you can follow these charging profiles so that you can see when is energy available to be pushed back into the grid. Well, let's use that energy and charge with it rather. Instead of us trying to push things back into the grid, we can rather utilize that excess energy. So there are many strategies that we can work with around, we call it power boosting or power limiting, power management. And I think it's really important that home chargers have these capabilities. So be aware, there are cheaper units in the market. They will not have these capabilities. They're just like a kettle. You can switch it on, it's on, it draws full power all the way. There's no mechanism for managing them. And it's really important in South Africa. Okay. So what did we build? We built a network across the country, really focusing on the major highways with a target of doing every charger within 200 kilometers. The idea was to gain distribution. It was to see that we've got a very well distributed network, not necessarily density. So it was really, or coverage. So the important thing is that we targeted coverage in the beginning. Do we need coverage along the entire N1? Otherwise, nobody will drive on the N1. If we went for density, I would have put all the chargers in Bloemfontein, Cape Town, and Johannesburg, and none in between, because that's where the numbers are. Okay, but that doesn't make sense to open a highway. So to open the highway, we really have to go for coverage first. Density will come, and we will start to get people complaining, oh, but I stood in line waiting for a charger. I think the 10 or so times it's happened, the people have all become best friends. So right now it's still part of creating part of the problem or part of the solution. But over time, they will get frustrations. And when those frustrations start to happen, we'll then have to start looking strategically at growing density. And that's where a lot of the other players in the market are looking at it. So, where's the better place to install, where we're going to need more, where people are more active. So this gives you some idea of the chargers across South Africa and where they sit. Just to show, if you look at this one, you can see around the Gauteng area, it looks like maybe 10. But if I really go close up on Gauteng, you can see it's much, much more dense. Now, a lot of these are at dealerships, shopping centers, etc. But these are all public charging stations that are available in the Gauteng area. Generally in Gauteng, you're never more than about 5 kilometers away from a charger, no matter where you are in the central part of Gauteng. So it really does give us nice coverage across the network, and it allows us to start to see the vision of where this can go when we see this type of density across the whole country. So just a couple of quick ones. What's important, as I said earlier, you really just load your money onto a prepaid account. You have a little an app called the Charge Pocket, and that app will allow you to put money into it. It'll allow you to find charging stations and give you various information about those charging stations. So when you find the info, you'll be able to see what is at that location, what services are there, what is available for me at that site. And there are various ways. You either just grab your card and you swipe it, so it's an RFID tap and go, or if your card wasn't in your car, you left it at home or something, you can then just scan the QR code and it'll come through to our call center and basically automatically start the charging session. If the QR code was damaged and you can't scan it, then you can open up the app, and in the app itself, you can physically select the charging station and start it. And if all else fails because your app screen is broken and you don't know anything else, and then just phone the call center and let somebody on this side start the charge remotely for you. So we really have a lot of, there's no reason to be struggling at a charging station. No matter what that challenge is that you're facing, we typically can get you through it and get you onto it. So I think that's the basics of what GridCars has been doing and where we've gone with everything.
Yeah, thanks for that, Winston. I think, what you've done there, particularly for me, is just give that level of confidence that there's coverage, across the country. That's first thing. And then, like you said, the density is coming. The Gauteng, if you're within 5 kilometers, it's really not that far. It's really very close to where you are. And if I can get to Cape Town from Durban, which it looks like I can go through the Drakensberg, which would be a lovely trip. I know, Henry, if you're going to wait for me for an extra month to make my trip down, because it looks like a great place to make a route.
It's not going to take you a month. It's going to take you a day. So, Henry, you can happily let him do it like that.
No, I'd like to kind of.
It's a month if you're going to stop over.
I like to take my time. Anyway, so I think, one of the things that, is obviously we are a green business, AW Power, and what we wanted to support is obviously solar. And we talked about, getting power from the grid as a couple of the sources besides solar. So, one of the questions we've got here is, and we'll start the poll off, I think most of the people on this call probably know the answer to this question, but let's launch it anyway. What do you think is the major source for electricity in our country at the moment? No responses yet. It's a bit of a trick question, this one, and I think it's probably a very topical one as well with Mantashe and the Minister of Power. He's obviously got his foot in the door with coal. So the reality is we've got to understand that we're still not in a world where it's completely green, but we are a green first company. And we really want to drive that sort of message home as well, that there's not just cost effectiveness from driving an EV, there's also cost effectiveness just from having a solar PV either installed in your residential or particularly actually in your commercial side, because the payback period is a little bit better. I mean, Henry, maybe you want to talk to those. So not just the benefits of what you get from EV off charging, but just from PV itself.
Yeah, interesting comment also on the previous discussion from Winston is there's no need for you to worry if we do install a PV system at home or the office. Our engineering team will make sure that you'll never have the problem that you overload the system. They automate that. They look at your house, your load, tractors, and so on, and we automate these technologies in place that you can automate that. So there's not a worry for the user. And I think secondly, also looking at the charge stations, what we found is driving 2 trips to Knysna and back is if you charge a car from a DC charge station, the first to 80% of full filling up to 80% is very fast. Then from 80 to 100 is very slow. This is to protect the battery. So what we found is rather have more stops more often and start and charge about 80%. It takes much less time, and your throughput time, your overall stopping time is much less, only half charging of 80%. And you also have more relaxing, I think probably as part of the lifestyle, have more stops, relax, enjoy it, and then you also reduce your time. So looking at residential, I think you can go for your typical mobile charge stations. Comes with the cars 1.2, 1.5 or 2 kilowatt, which is not a big load. It's typical, very similar to a kettle. There's options for 7.4 kilowatt single phase or a 22 kilowatt three phase. If you have a 3-phase house, you can opt for a 3-phase system as well. Typical solar system would be a good size would be a 5 kilowatt peak of solar, and an 8 kilowatt hybrid inverter will be recommended. Because with a hybrid inverter, if you overload, if you require more generation than what you generate from your PV, it will use the grid as a backup. So there are very, very smart ways of managing your load. So typically for a home, a 5 kilowatt inverter with a 5 kilowatts peak of PV, you can support a full house cell, which typically there's two geysers, plus a mobile EV station, EV charger. So typical pricing for a 5 kilowatt system is about from 140,000 upwards in that range. Going for 8 kilowatt, which is much bigger and nice, a great start. For a bigger system is about 180,000. If you have a three-phase house, you can go for a 12 kilowatt peak 3-phase inverter with 8 kilowatts peak of solar on your roof. with a lithium, and then that your pricing there is from about 250,000 rand upwards. This is just, I think, looking at these numbers, I think planning ahead, it makes sense if you build a house or upgrade your house, look at these numbers, install the system, and you reduce your consumption at your home, you reduce your costs, you also have energy security, plus you can drive your car at virtually zero direct cost.
And I think let me just slow me down, just putting the maths in my head here, which it's early in the morning, so I probably got it wrong. But if I put a 140k PV system into my house, kind of the base level there, obviously that's going to be able to charge my BMW i3, which probably take what eight hours for a 40 kilowatt car, so that you do it overnight. But the 140k, if I added that to the cost of the vehicle, so if I did them together, so we're taking 140 plus 560, so let's say 700k for the car and a PV system. So that's your kind of initial outlay. There's not many cars nowadays. They're big sort of family cars that you're going to get less than that. So you're saying for 700k all in, you could get a solar PV which is going to charge your car, which is going to be your majority of actually people's running costs for their car. So you're actually going to reduce all your petrol costs. So for me, I'm spending at least $2 grand a year. $2 grand a month. So that's 24k a year. So I've got that cost saving straight away. Is that what you're saying at a high level there?
Yes.
So okay, well that's a no-brainer from a business case for myself. I'm glad I'm getting the car for free as well to share. But I need to look into the charging for the electricity as well. Okay, so on the commercial side, I think we've had this conversation. What got me really excited is the payback period for commercial side on PV. So talk a little bit to that for us.
Yeah, typically for a commercial site, we would go for a grid-type system, which does not include batteries. So you mentioned before you will charge at night. You never charge at night. With these systems, you always charge at home. So going home, you will not charge typically on your homebound night. You will charge the next day back at the office. But weekends, you will charge from home. So at the office, you will then typically using a grid-type system, which is no batteries, which is the lower cost solar PV system, because the batteries is quite a large part of the cost of a system. So going for a grid-type system, you have about a 4 years payback. So if you add also, on a tip for the office use, you will use the system in daytime. In the evening when the sun is down, typically you would shut down the business, you go home, the car is also going home as well. So your use is typically through the day when there is sun. So with a 4 years payback period on those grid-type systems, adding your PV to the load as well, it gives you much more efficiencies in terms of combined efficiencies of charging your car as well as your office. So,
and just taking that one step further, I mean, there's obviously the work from home model, and there's obviously the tax rebates now if you're running your office from home. So effectively a commercial installation on a home is effectively could be a commercial installation for a business working from their house. So effectively they would qualify for the same tax rebates. So it might be worthwhile investing that on both their house and their work from home commercial property.
Yes, typically. So if you're a business, you can pay, if you install a system, a solar PV system, you can write off that your full cost in the first year of depreciation, which is a tremendous benefit, a tax benefit. So it's payback. It's a no-brainer, I think. And if we finance, we also have a financing scheme with Nedbank, for example. If you finance a system like that, your installments per month is typically covered by your savings, which is a no-brainer. So installing a system like that, you finance it, your savings will pay for your cost. And if you add the cost of your savings in the car, it's even better, So financially, it's a no-brainer to go this route. But you always charge in daytime.
I'm learning that. Look, as I said, I'm not an EV driver yet, so I'll learn those tricks of the trade. But I think, you mentioned on the cost saving, and I think we've done that calculation. The Eskom increases that are expected, besides the fact that you might not even have energy security, I think was looking at something like 15%. And so So the cost benefit analysis, when you look at solar PV for your business and your home, you're getting energy security, so you don't have to run a smelly generator and the petrol cost. That's the first thing. But you can also just not have those electricity costs go up when the grid's actually available.
Yep, that's right.
Okay. All right, so I want to bring Winston back here. Part of what we also want to sell to you is not just the fact that we want you driving an EV and using solar to charge it, because that obviously has zero running cost for you. But there's also a nice way for you to make money. And I think that's part of this journey for those people who are interested in this technology and where they want to go. So Winston, how can they make money out of this?
Sure. I think there's just so many ways. This is a growing industry. It's really the opportunities depend very much on your business model. So just to give you some examples, if you're running wine farms or restaurants or resorts or bed and breakfasts, and you want to start to attract that particular market. When I go driving away for the weekend, I now actively start looking, not so much for bed and breakfasts that have chargers, because there just are very few, but at the very least for bed and breakfasts that understand charging. So when I phone, I say, listen, I have an EV, I will need to plug it in. Is that okay? Just to give you an example, I had one and I phoned them and I said that, and the guy said, oh, you have to charge. Okay, we'll charge you an extra 800 Rand. And that was just crazy. So they lost me. I went somewhere else, and I think that the opportunity lies in putting down a proper charging station that can be managed and built. So the customer arrives there with their particular charging card, whether it is from the vehicle manufacturer or from GridCars, and they tap their card, and that the money gets collected and paid over to the bed and breakfast for the actual service. So you can make money out of selling a charging session to those customers. Certainly, if you're more of a let's say a restaurant, then you can start to attract people to the site and say, come here and charge. This is where you come and spend that hour to just get your top-up charge. And certainly there are a lot of places and centers that are looking at free charging. So some of them look and say, well, we'll just make it part of our business cost or part of our base cost, and we'll then make it freely available. Normally, those are not going to be fast chargers. They're going to be much, much slower chargers, just simply because of the cost. So if you put on a DC fast charger, you might be, pulling 400 Rand an hour out of that charger, as opposed to a slower charger where you pull in less. But now that's where the next trick comes, is that you put that down with solar. Because you do that with solar, the solar is supporting your property, you're immediately seeing a saving on your electricity, and at the same time, you're now being able to give free electricity to the EV driver. And whether you're selling that electricity to make money or whether you're doing it free as part of your service offering, that's part of it. And then the last area that I'd like to highlight is that there are many sites. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
So just to jump on that quickly, and I know we're running out of time here. So we only got one slide to go, guys. So those who want to drop off, we will be finishing soon. But just on the, you're charging what, 5 Rand per kilowatt hour effectively. That's what let's put it 5 Rand. So effectively, from an investment perspective, if you had one of these chargers and you using it, 4 hours a day, you're getting 20 Rand from that charger. So it's a cumulative thing. Or how does it work?
So definitely not, because we're charging the cost, and the cost is very much up to the site. But let's say the site decides they're going to charge 5 Rand per kilowatt hour. So it's not 5 Rand per hour. And in that hour, you could be delivering, in the best case of an AC charger, you could deliver 22 kilowatts in that 1 hour. So that's, that's easily well over 100 Rand an hour that you're earning from that charger that is being busy at that point. Okay. And the last point.
Yeah. So where can if I was interested to run this as, I'm someone on the call and I've got a location that I believe is quite high traffic and I want to get one of these. Do you have sort of that business case breakdown and contact details that you could provide in the chat window so they could get hold of you?
I can definitely provide details, but I think it'll also be great to just contact Henry, because they are also installing the solar along with charging stations. If you're looking for just a charging station, you're welcome to call us. But as I said, that more consolidated approach of saying, let's do this properly, let's do it with green energy and green planning. Obviously, if it's things like looking at expanding on the new highway charging opportunities, absolutely give us a call and we can talk you through that. And there we do have business models, but specifically then for DC or AC, when you're looking at putting up a public charging station in that sense. So we can certainly have those discussions.
And I think maybe that combination, Henry, you want to just talk to the promotion that we've got running.
Yeah, maybe that's about it. I think if you approach AWB Power for a system, a solar PV system, and also a charge station, we'll throw in a charge station for 7 kilowatt mobile charge station, a mobile charger, which is quite fast. It's 2, 3, 4, 5 hours, and you charge and you fill up your car. So that's part of our promotion.
Okay. So I mean, look, guys, we've had a lot of time here. We're obviously 5 minutes over, but I think it's been quite an exciting topic, and I normally gauge by the amount of people that have dropped off, and I think most people have been engaged. So I really appreciate everyone in the audience this time. We're going to stay on for any questions. You can obviously drop any questions you like in the chat window as well. But we have, you know, this Teams meeting will be open. So if you suddenly come up with a question at a later stage, you can pop it into the chat window, just go back into the meeting and type it in there at a later stage. Or you can drop a line to info@awpower.co.za and we'll pick that up there. And otherwise, just go to the AW Power or GridCars.co.za's websites, and you can see all the information there. I hope it's been valuable. I know I've learned a lot, and I love learning the more about this journey with the EVs. But yeah, drop us a line now or open up the lines to any calls or anyone wants to chat. But thank you again for all your time. And thanks, Winston, for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you all.